Bobby Fischer became a Grandmaster at the age of 15. The year was 1958, and for today, we're going to be looking at his first victory, his first W as a Grandmaster. It was against an Argentinian Grandmaster, Raul Carlos Sanguinetti, and he destroyed this guy. It's a miniature. It was only 25 moves, which categorizes it as such. So Bobby Fischer, loved by many, hated by many, respected by all, I hope, in the chess world, played a Sicilian, his favorite opening. We get knight to f3, an open Sicilian that plays for d4 rather than a closed Sicilian that plays for f4. Knight f3, it becomes a theoretical battle. Even in the year 1958, even in Slovenia where this was played. That's where it was played. Pawn to d6, we're going to get a Najdorf. d4, you take that pawn on d4, they take back with the knight, and black finally strikes, gaining his first tempo, attacking this pawn with his knight. White has to defend that pawn, so the main line is knight to c3, and in this position, Fischer goes pawn to a6. The Najdorf variation, arguably the most complex line in chess. You know that game where Bobby Fischer crushed Najdorf, who was playing the Najdorf? That's respect. That's amazing. We love those types of stories. But that's not this game. We get a6. The point is you stop anything from coming to b5. And this will allow the queen to come to c7, where it stands quite nicely, applying pressure here, allowing for a rook slide here, and no tempo gain can be done on b5. The other nice thing about this a6 move is you can extended fianchetto later on, getting a bishop on b7, and if you can envision extending this pawn to b4, sometimes you can pick up this pawn. So now we get the move pawn to f4. So he's playing it in a Grand Prix manner, and it is theory, but it's not the best. Black has already equalized. What's the equalizing move in the Sicilian? Pawn to e5. Now it comes with a tempo on the knight, and it applies pressure to f4. White has a decision to make now. What does he do? Well, you should not take this pawn as white, because then you're just giving a better queenless middle game to black. And what I mean by that is black is more developed. He has less pieces on the 8th rank than white has on the 1st rank. You're gaining a tempo on this pawn, and you're just going to get your pieces out pretty quickly and have a very comfortable game. And there's no advantage that white has in the center because both e-pawns are equal but opposing each other. So that's the equalizing move. The risk that comes with e5 is that one, you create a backwards pawn if white doesn't take. A backwards pawn is a pawn that cannot be pushed or it'll get taken. And you're also giving white an outpost. However, this outpost needs to be claimed dynamically rather than statically. We're going to talk about the difference soon. So here, white goes knight back to f3. He did not want to take, entering a queenless middle game. So he goes knight back to f3, adding pressure onto e5. We get queen c7 now, guarding e5 even more. Now you might be like, okay, there's an outpost for white. Why can white not claim it with d5? Well, he can, but that's a static claim, a claim that will not change. You see, because if knight takes, pawn takes is the static way to take back, and this pawn blockades this pawn, and it's just not the greatest pawn in the world. You're going to develop, and then if you go, for example, say takes, and pawn to c4, guarding the pawn, making it nice and pretty. The problem with this is that now when the c pawn is on c4, it can never go to c3, and it doesn't stand on c2. So for example, this knight d7, knight c5, you can envision some e4 and some claiming on d3. It's very long term, but it's still true. This bishop on d3, maybe its vision will be cut off by f5, and there's just no good place to put it. So even though it's just slightly better for black, Fischer will destroy his opponent if he's in a slightly better position. It's just what he did. Petition to change GM to Gigamaster instead of Grandmaster. What is a Gigamaster? Think of it like a gigabyte. And that's not a plus-size model finishing a burger in one bite. That's 1,000,000 bytes, right? So a Grandmaster, a Gigamaster, taking down 1,000,000 masters. That's what that stands for to me. So we don't get this. Now you might be like, okay, what if he claims it dynamically? Dynamically would be a queen because the queen will not be blockaded. It's free to move. But arguably then black's just going to gain tempi on your position. And this bishop will be guarding d5, allowing the pawn to get pushed later on, so it will not be a backwards pawn. That's the equalizing way to play the Sicilian once you get e5 in. Very goofy pawn structure, but it works. So after queen c7, we get the move bishop d3. He's like, I'm just going to develop. Do not take this pawn. That would be a tragedy, because not only does it help your opponent develop, it's going to give him the open F file. He has a nice pawn in the center of the board, and now he's going to aim in on this backwards pawn, which is a focal point. It's a weakness. You don't want to give your opponent a focal point, a square that's easy to attack. So, what do we get after bishop d3? We get knight bd7. Very nice. This knight can go to c5. It guards e7. It does everything it needs to do. See, he's not worried about making his light squared bishop good, because where does that bishop want to go in Sicilians? It wants to get fianchettoed on b7, aiming at e4, aiming at the blockaded pawn there on e4. So even though it blocks this route, that's not the intended route. Good train of thought by Fischer. So we get castles by white, pawn to b5. Look at that. Prediction of the year, going for the extended fianchetto. We get queen e1, and this move might look silly, but it's a typical Grand Prix idea, right? Your queen cannot enter on the light squares on the king side due to this knight, but you shift it over to the dark squares, and indeed, it can make infiltration towards the king. You're assuming this king is castling king side, so you're assuming you want your queen towards the king to attack it later on. We get bishop b7, does not deter Fischer from developing his light squared bishop. And here is where white begins to play not the greatest. What he should do is go king h1, saving his king from this diagonal that can be annoying. He can also play a3 to deter the move pawn to b4, which would dislodge the knight, aiming at e4. He should play something of the sort. I like king h1 best. However, he goes knight h4. This is a move you can play against some. It's not a move you can play against Fischer. The point of knight h4 is if Fischer or someone played bishop to e7, this knight would go to the nice square that is f5, aiming at the bishop, aiming at the pawn on d6, aiming at g7 with check. This knight is a beautiful knight. In fact, the best move in this position would be bishop f8, and you basically just allowed white to move his knight from f3 to f5 for free. You don't want to do that. So how do you punish knight h4? Well, you play pawn g6. Simple. You knew it wanted to come to f5. Now it cannot come to f5. The knight jumps back to f3. So you're telling me Fischer just got a free fianchetto against a grandmaster? That's huge. That's basically 2 tempi. By the way, quick pause. I hope you guys like the lighting better. I'm not done yet. I have one more thing coming in tomorrow, so it's going to be even better. But I'm pretty hyped about it. And I have pretty high standards, might I say. The other thing is I am going to make a video on all the decisive World Championship games, all the blunders, make it like a montage. I wanted to ask you, do you guys want me to make it one match at a time, or do you want me to make every single game in one video? It's either going to be a very long video or like 15 decently long videos. I'm going to put 2 comments, like which one you prefer, whichever gets more likes, I will do that one. I can do either, but I didn't realize how many decisive games there are. Also, I don't know if I want to do pure big blunders or just slight blunders and then a positional squeeze. So please give me your thoughts, because I am making this video. I am going to edit it. It's going to be very good. Back to the game. We get the move queen to h4. This applies pressure. To some, it would deter them from castling. Fischer saw no ghosts. He's like, what are you going to do? Checkmate me with my knight on f6? No shot. And he was right. So we get f takes e5. Point is, white opens up the dark squared bishop. We get these pawns facing each other in the center. Keep in mind, this pawn is black is more built up on white's central pawn than vice versa. White is not so much built up on black's central pawn. We get bishop h6. Positionally speaking, that is correct. You are threatening the fianchetto bishop, which is the better bishop. It's the one defending black's king, for your own bishop. So that would be a good trade. Create some dark squared holes around black's king, not to mention open f-file. So there's still chances if you're not facing Bobby Fischer. We get knight to h5. In my opinion, Fischer's the GOAT. I mean, it's hard to compare eras because they used to adjourn games. Now they don't, so it shows endgame conversion. But I mean, this guy would take down 50 of the greatest minds ever, helping the person in the adjourned position. And he was just a one-man army because he had no friends. So we get knight to h5. Not a bad move. Fischer's like, okay, you want to trade dark squared bishops? Fine by me. I claim the f4 square. So this knight on the side of the board is actually very, very good. And it's not so easy to defend for white. What is he going to do? Play g3 with this long-term hold? I mean, envision this e-pawn not being here. This bishop's going to be an absolute unit. And that's just not great. It's just not great. So we get the move rook a to d1, claiming the semi-open file that will furthermore be opened up. Fischer plays the move knight to f4, a good move. He really wanted to induce g3. I don't know if he would have taken the bishop or went back. I imagine he would go back, and you induced the weakness that you wanted. So knight f4, a logical move. You could also go knight c5 and build up with knight e6, have two horses over there, but to each their own. So what do we get? We get knight f4 and rook to f2. A nice move by white. He's like, I'm going to double up this way and apply pressure on the d file. Very logical. Also blocking any checks. We have pawn to f6, stopping this knight from dancing anywhere that it pleases. Covering g5, opening up f7, maybe for some defense on the 7th if need be. White doubles up, and now we get knight to c5. Very good. These knights are very, very good. The bishop slides back to f1. That is a grandmaster move if I've ever seen one. I'm going to make a positional video soon with backwards bishop moves. All right. So are you telling me we have two attackers on e4 and they only have one defender? Is that a free pawn? No. Calculate why that's not a free pawn. Why is white winning if you just take this? Don't you just win a pawn? Well, this knight on c5 was guarding d7. And when d7 is not guarded, white will end up picking up a queen. Black will lose the game. So that is not what happened. What does happen? Well, we get the move pawn to b4, kicking the knight. This is the last chance white has for some compensation. Find the best square for the knight. He did not. Knight to a4 would have been best, applying pressure to the knight that's guarding d7. Yes, black is still better. You know, maybe he'll play rook f7. There's no tactics anymore. It's going to be hard to hold this pawn. This would come with check. That knight is on the side of the board. Not great. So rather than knight a4, he played knight to d5. Now you got to calculate accurately. There's only one winning move. This game is coming to an end. There's going to be a brilliance soon. Do not take it with the knight. If you take it with the knight, that's a very good pass pawn. So you take it with the bishop. They take back. And now, how do you move forward? Well, believe it or not, this rook on d2 is actually just trapped. It cannot go anywhere. Look at these two knights next to each other covering all the squares. So at this point, it's essentially hopeless. It's even more hopeless when he drops his queen back, applying no pressure. Fischer snaps off the rook and find the brilliancy. The brilliancy is knight takes d5. White plays one more move and resigns. You might be like, doesn't that just hang a knight? Why does it not? You see, if queen takes d5, you just bring your rook over to d8, and you're actually going to be the one picking up further material. So white plays one more move. He plays c4. He's like, does Fischer know the special rule in chess? Believe it or not, Fischer did. He does en passant, and white resigns because this is a hopeless position. You're down material. You're down positionally. I'm sure he'd find a Smothers mate somewhere in there. So a very cool game. Fischer's first win as a Grandmaster. Thank you guys as always for watching. Have a great day. Peace. Boom.